Hello? Okay, so I think I was waiting for somebody to introduce me who isn't coming. So I can introduce myself, that's fine. Thanks everybody for coming, and today I'm talking about this concept that I don't want to say I'm the first person to I coined the term digital dualism, and I want to talk about how we talk about the internet. Okay, so this is sort of a meta, abstract discussion on how we should understand this relationship between the online and the offline, the digital and the physical, what we call this face-to-face, and when we're out surfing the web. And I kind of want to start with, I don't know how well you can see these photos, and one of the things I want to talk about, I'm going to get back to this at the end, is how we talk about the offline. And I think a lot of people here are talking about the internet, what we do when we are in front of some kind of glowing screen, when we're sitting at a laptop, when we're looking at our phones. And I think what would be really interesting is to also theorize what happens when we're talking face-to-face, and how that's also influenced by the internet. And there's been a real trend lately because of the deep intrusion, the ubiquity of the internet. A lot of people have now begun to push for disconnecting, logging off, digital detoxes. The first photo is from a summer camp that adults go to where they leave all of their technology behind. And they live like kids without their technology. And a friend sent me the second photo. That's a cafe in London. I have a whole folder full of these photos of cafes and bars where they say no social media, no glowing screens, because we're going to have real conversation, real connection. And so later I'm going to talk about that word detox. I'm going to talk about that word real and how we've come to understand this relationship between the online and the offline. And I think that a lot of this comes from how deeply technology has infiltrated our lives. Right now there's about 5 cameras pointed at me. There's screens going off everywhere. You look out the window right now and you'll probably see half the people looking down at their devices. And so certainly this relationship between the online and the offline, connection and disconnection, that's become really important. And I want to think about how we've come to understand that, how we talk about that, and maybe how we can re-understand that a little bit better. I think we've made a particular mistake. There it goes. And so one of the ways that we talk about the online and offline is in that very dualist way. And by dualist, I mean separate, right? Distinct, dichotomous. Even the terms online and offline, we talk about that like a light switch, on and off. That is what we call a zero-sum understanding, a trade-off. That is, if you're online, that means you're not offline. Right? If you're offline, that means you're not online. We've created this dualism. One of the ways we talk about is saying the real and the virtual. In America, there's a common slang, IRL. I don't know if Italians have a slang like that. If there is one, I don't know, yell it out. But Americans often, especially younger kids, they say IRL. IRL means this what we're doing right here, face-to-face. It means in real life. And you hear that all the time. Real to mean not Facebook. Real to mean I'm not on the internet. And when we talk about being on the internet, we often say the word virtual, right? It's not real. It's virtual. It's a simulation. It's the documentation of the real maybe, but it's not real. And let's think about the implications of that. If you say the real to mean not Facebook, you're saying that Facebook isn't real. You're saying that the internet isn't real. And I certainly disagree with that, and I'm going to talk more about that later on. So the question that I'm asking here is, how have we created, maintained, regulated? By regulated, I mean policed, enforced, this division between the online and offline, between connection and disconnection. How do we understand that? And how do we critique that? This dual vision of the internet, of the online and offline, that really strict line, that wall that we've built between the online and offline. I think one of the best metaphors for understanding what I mean by digital dualism is the movie The Matrix. The Matrix is a good movie to reference because people have seen The Matrix. When I teach undergrads, they've seen The Matrix. When I talk to older people, they've seen The Matrix. In Italy, I'm sure a lot of people have seen The Matrix. And that's really colored how we've thought about the internet. That there is the real, Zion, right, that isn't the Matrix. And then you pop a pill and you go on this fantastic journey off into database land where there's floating ones and zeros, and you're in the internet land. You're in the virtual world. You see that again in other movies like Tron and Hackers. And in fact, a lot of how we talk about the internet is, I think, based in cyberpunk, is based in fiction. We say cyberspace. That's obviously a term that comes from William Gibson. And so I think cyberpunk has really gave us a really fun fiction of the internet as this place that you go to, this new land. But I'm not sure that fiction is helpful for how we should research and understand the internet. I think it's a fun fiction, but I don't think it produces accurate questions to ask, accurate research methods to study the internet, and it colors our conclusions. And so that's the dualist way of talking about the internet. The virtual world as some separate space. And what I'm proposing is that we think of the online and the offline, digital and physical, technology and humanity as always enmeshed, deeply enmeshed, imploded. This is a synthetic view. I think that starting with the synthetic view of the internet and this face-to-face conversation will lead us to ask better questions, to understand what people are doing better, and to create better conclusions. And in the next panel, we're going to talk about the good and bad of the internet. I think it leads to correct some mistakes that we've made in critiquing the internet. And actually, I think a synthetic view gives us much more powerful critiques of the internet. So I'm calling that augmented reality. By augmented reality, I don't mean the software apps. All right, I'm using that as a metaphor. Think of virtual reality. Remember, a few years ago, people were very into virtual reality. Things like Second Life and the big virtual reality helmets that you would wear, and you went off into a virtual world. Obviously, those aren't popular as much. And then came these augmented reality apps. That is, you look through your smartphone, and it overlays digital data onto the world that you see with your eyes, right? I thought that was a really good metaphor for digital dualism versus augmented reality, a dualist versus synthetic view. The dualist view is that the internet is this other space. A synthetic view, the augmented view, is that what we have is one reality. There's no virtual world and physical world. We have one reality, one world, and that world is always being influenced by technology, different types of technology, right? You may not be looking at a glowing screen right now, but you're still influenced by technology. You're influenced by the architecture of this room. The fact that all of your chairs are facing me gives me some authority in speaking. That's a technology of power and observation. We could think of language as a technology or social norms as a technology. And I think that we appreciate the face-to-face a little bit more because of all the time we spend on Facebook or in front of glowing screens. That's another way that the internet has influenced even this, even if you're not looking at the internet. So that's how I'm trying to articulate the internet, the online, the offline, as one reality that's always being influenced by the digital. You can never disconnect. You can never log off. Some of the theoretical background here, and I'm a sociologist. If I was at a sociology conference, we'd spend a really long time on this stuff, and if you want to do that over beers later on, we can do that. But I just sort of want to reference, I'm certainly not the first person to say that technology and humanity should be viewed as synthetic. My biggest influence here is Donna Haraway, her famous Cyborg Manifesto. And the argument there is that we often make a dualism between human bodies and technology. We think of technology as inhuman. And Haraway argues that no, bodies are always technological. Society evolved with technology, right? You can't understand technology without remembering that it is embodied and social, and you can't understand the social and even human bodies without understanding technology. They're always enmeshed and blurred together. Okay, and I also have up here Catherine Hales. She does a lot of really great work most famously her book, How We Became Post-Human, where she talks about material and information as always being interpenetrated, okay? That it's not that we have information and then we have material, things like a table that you can touch, that instead they're always blurred, they are always influencing each other as a dialectic, as a conversation, always back and forth, rather than a strict sort of dualism. I want to kind of move past some of that and just think about things maybe more practically. That graph, you can't really read it, but this comes from a Pew report. So Pew, they gather really great data on American internet users. And so this graph is just showing that 89% of your Facebook friends you've met more than once face-to-face. And some of the mistakes that people originally made when they talked about social media is that they forgot how deeply related social media and our everyday lives are. That a lot of your friends that you see face-to-face, they're also on Facebook, and a lot of your Facebook friends you see face-to-face. And what this report also demonstrates is that people that use social media more tend to have more connections. That is, they have more what they call close core ties. People that you could say, if you ask them to help you move, right, that'd be somebody who's a core tie that you could talk about secrets with. That's people that use social media more, they tend to be more civically involved, politically active. They join more clubs. But what's really interesting is that the people that were using social media more in this report also met face-to-face more. And that really confuses sometimes when I talk to older people who tend to be a little bit more dualist, this zero-sum idea of the online and offline. And they would say, well, if you're spending more time online, certainly you must be spending less time offline. If you're looking at, this is the Turkle argument, if you're looking at your phone, then you're not having real conversation. It's a trade-off, right? This is the dualist understanding. And what the research is showing is that people spend more time online are spending more time offline too. They're doing more and more. That's what you do on social media, right? A lot of what you do is predicated on meeting face-to-face. Indeed, a lot of what we post on social media is things that we're doing face-to-face. And so there's sort of just a common sense. For people that use social media, that's almost common sense, that there's this really deep integration between social media and your everyday life. But people still forget that. And one of the points here, what I'm not arguing is that the online and offline are the same, okay? I'm not saying that cyber sex is the same as sex, cyber war is the same as war. I'm not saying that talking, G-chatting, doing IM is the same as meeting at a coffee shop. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that we need to understand how both of those, the online, the offline, constantly interact with each other. Right, there's two mistakes that we make, if the two mistakes that digital dualists make. One is forgetting how much digital interaction influences what happens offline, okay? So you might think, oh, I'm at a conference. I'm seeing somebody talk in person, embodied. This isn't the internet. Absolutely, that's very different. It's very different to see me talk here than if I was Skyping in on the screen. But the first mistake you would make is then to call this offline, to call this disconnected. It isn't. I'm here because of the work I did on the internet, right? We appreciate and enjoy this face-to-face interaction partly because it isn't over Skype. We spend so much time in front of screens that we really appreciate this. And maybe in the next panel I'll say that we more than appreciate this. I think we sort of fetishize it in certain ways. And the other mistake that and also you would forget how deeply this is still mediated. Right, we're being mediated by language. We're being mediated by the technologies of social norms. We're being mediated by the technologies of fashion. Obviously, architecture. They put these really nice books behind me to make me probably look more smart. So this is, all of this is mediating this interaction. Okay, there's no such thing as unmediated or non-technological interaction. The digital is just one more flavor, one more flow of information. Right? You're not going on to this other world. It's one more mediating flow of information. The other mistake that digital dualists will make is thinking that when you are online, when you're behind an iPad or you're sitting in front of your screen, that you're on this digital world, right? And forgetting how deeply embodied and offline your time on Facebook really is, right? When people are on Facebook, when people are on social media, they are still embodied. They still have bodies. They have feelings. They have emotions. They have history. They have politics, right? And sometimes we forget about it. The people that said the internet was going to be this revolutionary new space, kind of like the West, the American fiction of the cowboy, Manifest Destiny. That was completely false. What did those people do? They ended up creating a space that reflected their own politics. The sort of libertarian, obviously they were mostly men. They reflected male politics, white, educated, Western. People talk about Wikipedia having a neutral voice. It's 93% men. That's not a neutral voice. But we make that mistake over and over and over again, and forgetting how code is always social. Websites and technology are always embodied. So I want to go back to the idea of the digital detox that people talk about. And I don't know about here, but in America, every week there is an op-ed in some major newspaper about how I spent a week without my phone and how profound it was that I didn't have my phone. Here's a summer camp you can go to, and there's no technology. You're detoxing. When I go to the bar, the coffee shop, it's real social networking because we're all putting away our phones. Paul Miller, the Verge writer, an American writer, spent an entire year offline, and he said, I'm going to recapture my true, authentic being by disconnecting from technology. And I think it's really interesting how we use these words real, detox, the idea that I'm going to reconnect with my inner true being by putting away technology. This is all part of this move that I've just begun calling digital austerity. I've also kind of played with just digital abstinence and maybe using I think there's some parallel between sexual abstinence and sexual austerity and digital austerity in the way that we talk about it, the way that we create morals around being connected. In that you're seen as a moral, virtuous person by being able to ignore your vibrating phone, right? By not looking at your phone at the dinner table. And I think that's, at the base of it, that's very natural. It is very annoying when somebody's ignoring you and looking at their phone. But think about the words that we use to describe putting away our phone. We talk about it as being more real, being more authentic. Digital detox. We talk about being connected as a toxin. But that's really interesting to me, that we've pathologized connection, that we treat it in a medical way. And if I had more time here, maybe we would go into some Foucault and think about the medicalization of certain problems. And of course, when we are medicalizing something, when we're saying it's a toxin that you should detox from, we're not only creating the unhealthy, we're also creating the healthy, right? The normal. But if you're not looking at your phone, if you're disconnected, you're more healthy, you're more normal, right? And also this word real, going back to that phrase IRL, or in real life, to mean not Facebook. We're essentially saying that people, when they're looking at their phones and using their phones quite a bit, we're saying they're not real, or their socialization, their interaction isn't as real. I think that's pretty heavy-handed. That's pretty deep moralizing that we've collectively done. And those stakes are very high there. That what we're doing is we're using phones to determine who is more or less human. Okay, I get why it's annoying if somebody's ignoring you with a phone, but we've talked about it as determining one's own humanity, one's own reality. And that, to me, that says that there must be something deeper going on here than just being annoyed with the phone, right? When you're annoyed with somebody next to you who's looking at their phone, you're not thinking in your head, likely, that they're less of a human. Yet every day, that's the language that we use. That's the op-eds that are being written every week, is how things are less real because they're connected, because they're digital. And I think that's certainly a problem. And I wrote this essay. It was called The IRL Fetish. in that IRL, again referring to the offline in real life. And the argument there was that we don't just appreciate being offline, we've come to fetishize it. And by fetishize it, I mean two things. One, we mistakenly think that the offline is disconnected, and it's not, and we've already talked about that here. You're always being influenced by the offline. When Sherry Turkle famously wrote about walking on the beach and appreciating and breathing in the air and not looking at her phone, and then writing that up in the New York Times, she was thinking of Facebook. She was thinking of her social media, which is the New York Times, but she was appreciating that walk as not Facebook. That was still a very connected walk, even if she wasn't looking at her phone. So one, mistakenly thinking that your time spent offline is really disconnected. It's not. And two, using your disconnection to consider yourself a better person, more deep, more real, more authentic, more human, okay? That's my argument here, is that we've created the fiction of a virtual world, the online, something that is virtual and less real. We've created that fiction to simultaneously create the real, right? I think the real fiction object is the offline, the notion that we're somehow removed from technology. We're pure human beings that aren't in the simulated environment. I think that's a deeply conservative position, this idea that there's somehow a human that's pure and not technological. And I think Donna Haraway does the best job of describing how humans are always technological, and that notion of the pure, non-technological human is a deeply conservative one. She's obviously writing from a feminist perspective. And so that's the thing that I really want to push, and I'll hopefully have a chance to talk more in the next panel about how I think we should critique technology. We should create better manners. We should have better manners when we're using our phones. But let's not pretend that we're more real and authentic and human because we're not looking at our phones. I think we've created the fiction of the virtual in order to create this fiction of the real. And that's been a concern throughout the whole history of modernity. That's been a reoccurring concern throughout all of social theory, is this worry about what is real and what is authentic, right? We've had intrusive technologies for a really long time. Books got the same rap that social media got. Books were considered, they were taking you off into another world, they were distracting. Books were talked about the same way that social media was talked about. This has been a concern throughout all of modernity. What is real? What is authentic? How can we be real? Yeah, identity theory, a lot of identity theory is also about that, the performance versus the real. And I think we've used digital devices as one more way of capturing the real. We can say, oh, I am more real because you're doing something virtual. And I think that's always a conservative and troubling endeavor. So I'm gonna wrap up. I think I get the, how many minutes? 5 minutes, okay. So I want to wrap up and give more time for question and answers. To wrap up, I think that dualist critiques of the web are always unsatisfactory. If you're talking about the internet as a separate space, or that digital communication isn't real, that's not a very good critique of the internet, right? The power of the internet and the danger and risk, the things that we should really be critiquing, the power of the internet is in its reality. Okay? If you're calling it virtual, that's not going to be a very good critique of the internet. Its reality is what makes it risky and dangerous and something worth critiquing. So synthetic critiques of the internet, I feel, are going to be more fulfilling. They're going to be more persuasive. And last, I think that our critiques of the internet should be centered in progressive rather than conservative critiques. So instead, that critiques of the internet should always be focused on autonomy. They should be focused on inequalities. And I think that this dualist perspective doesn't bring us in that direction, and I'm going to spend more time on the next panel talking about that. I was going to talk about this here, but I was told I'm going to have a chance in the next panel to elaborate on that. So maybe I'll just move into question and answers. I think that might be more useful given the language barrier here. So thanks for your time. Thanks. Yes.
Hi, Nathan. I'd like to know what you think how you can define technology in your view, though, because a book and social media are quite different things, and of course you said that we have different ways of understanding our relationship with technology. So my concern is that when you say that technology is all these things, you're basically trying to it's possible that you're weakening your position somehow because you're saying less.
Right, right. So I have a very broad view of technology. So I went beyond things made of wires and gears and went to, I said, architecture, this room, and then I even said things like language. If you're a structuralist or a post-structuralist, you probably agree with me on that. Language is maybe being the most powerful technology. And then I even went to, I'd say identity and social norms are tools, technological tools. So this is a very broad view of technology. And why I don't think it weakens the term technology is by admitting that those are very different technologies, right? That the technology of the book is very different than the technology of social media. And in academia, we often talk about affordances. I'm not sure how many people know the term affordances, but it simply means what you think you can do and not do with a given technology. So what a technology allows, encourages, versus what it precludes, makes not possible or discourages. It's always what we think it allows and doesn't allow. And so different technologies have very different affordances. And I think that's how we save technology, even with a very big tent, a wide interpretation of technology. So that means that what we call the offline and online, and by this point I'm putting quotes around those, right? I don't think that there's a light switch online and offline. But when we're looking at a book, we might call that offline. But I'm saying no, that's still connected, that's still technological, and it's still influenced by digital data. It's kind of indirectly. So it's still online in some ways. But that's not to say the book is the same as social media, because books allow you to do different things than social media, and also doesn't allow you to do things that social media does allow you to do. So they have very different affordances. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I understand that you said if you want, we have a synthetic critic to opposition of virtual and the not virtual world. We can have something like a critic a critic that want something like digital austerity or a decroissance. I understand well your position. Do I understand well your position?
I'm not sure I followed. So I was talking about. So you're talking about critiquing the online and offline in a synthetic way. Are you asking what a critique, a synthetic critique of the internet might be, as opposed to a dualist critique, which we hear all the time, right? People are trading real life for something virtual. That's a very dualist critique. So you're asking maybe what a synthetic critique of the internet might be?
About this, because you analyze the whole, so you can't have something a critic, something like this, austerity or digital decroissance, something like this.
Okay, yeah, let me take a stab at it, and I apologize if I'm not answering exactly the question that you're asking. So a critique of the internet from a more augmented perspective, I think that can be done. For instance, one of the implications of the synthetic perspective is actually, in some ways, so Sherry Turkle's often described as somebody who's down on the internet. She doesn't like the internet, and she says we need to disconnect. Well, I actually think she's far more optimistic than I am, because she says that there's a solution to the problem of social media. All you have to do is disconnect. All you have to do is put away Facebook, And my argument is you could put away Facebook, and Facebook is still influencing your life. In fact, sometimes it's even more. The person who's most influenced by Facebook is the person who still doesn't have a profile. Kind of in that same way that you're really influenced by money when you don't have any. And so I think really the problem is even more deep than what she describes. For instance, one of my other projects, I talk about the Facebook eye, or this, we view the world through the logic of social media. It's a reference to the camera eye, old theories of photography. How you view, if you're a photographer, if you've taken a lot of photos, you know what the camera eye is. That even when you put the camera away, you see the world as a potential photograph. You see the framing and the lighting and the depth of field and all of that. And I think the same has happened with social media. We have sort of a Facebook eye. That the technology of social media has been downloaded into our brains, and that means that even when we're not looking at a glowing screen, we see the world as a potential status update, photo, tweet. If you find a new restaurant you really like, you might think about checking in on Facebook or writing a review for it. To me, that's the essence of the augmented perspective, right? And that can be, I think there's a lot of critique to be made there, that social media companies, they coded a website, and that code has been downloaded into our brains, right? I don't think that social media is off in the computers and in the databases. I think it's in our own phenomenology, our own experience of the world. And I think that actually leads to far more critical and damning critiques of the internet than saying, oh, you're trading the real for something virtual. Yeah. Other questions? Or how are we on time? We have to stop. We have to stop. Okay, so there'll be, there's another panel that I'll be on next that'll be talking more about this critical positive versus negative black-white view of the internet. So I'll get a chance if you have any more questions, or just tweet at me. I'm happy to talk about this. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
punto è il momento della sezione Storytelling, in collaborazione con l'archivio diaristico di Pieve Santo Stefano, in provincia di Arezzo si trova. E in questo archivio sono presenti quasi 7.000 diari di gente comune, che ha portato lì i propri scritti, i propri diari, e l'archivio li custodisce con molta cura e ogni anno istituisce anche un premio dove questi diari partecipano. Quelli che hanno il permesso di partecipare, ovviamente decide ogni diarista, e c'è un premio che consiste poi in una pubblicazione dello stesso scritto. In questi giorni ne stiamo leggendo 12, abbiamo scelto 12 diaristi. Io ora vi leggo di questo diarista che si chiama Dan Rabah, che è un ebreo italiano, comunista, artista, kibbuznik, residente ad Haifa con la moglie e la figlia, e trova nel forum L'isola della speranza la possibilità di dare voce a un disagio crescente. Lui scrive: mi sento chiuso in una gabbia, costretto, legato, e non ho la forza di liberarmi, di vivere. Spero che in questo sito si abbia la dignità di parlarsi, di consigliarsi. E per trovare risposte ai frequenti momenti di depressione, per imparare a scambiarsi trucchi di sopravvivenza, che il forum diventa il luogo ideale in cui si incontrano tante amicizie, forse tante solitudini. Tra il giugno del 1998 e il gennaio del 99, ad ogni ora del giorno e della notte, si incrociano messaggi che sono come urla sofferte da tempo, sepolte nel proprio io per timore dell'indifferenza e dell'incomprensione altrui. E il carteggio con Marta, con la quale lui scriverà un libro, contiene messaggi di una particolare ampiezza. Vite che dopo terapie, ricoveri in clinica e lunghi periodi di apatia si proiettano con curiosità verso la prossima fase di pienezza, di creatività, del buio, del vento. Finalmente libere di alzarsi dal letto e uscire a comprare pane e latte, il vero eroismo di un depresso. In una crescente intimità, come se la scrittura si aprisse uno squarcio nel velo dei propri silenzi, ogni naufrago acquista coraggio e autocoscienza. L'angoscia adesso è presente ogni mattina quando mi sveglio e penso che non vorrei svegliarmi, ma poi il dovere mi fa andare avanti perché c'è un bene da qualche parte e lo voglio trovare. Anche se poi torna l'ansia per le proprie debolezze, per quella chiusura che investe anima e testa, Dan riesce a non perdersi e a risollevarsi. Per fortuna, dice Dan, non sono solo. Brindo a voi con questo bicchiere di limonata ghiacciata. Ora io andrò a leggervi delle mail che lui scrive con appunto i suoi amici del forum, proprio su questo tema della depressione. Soggetto: parlarsi, cercarsi, dirlo. Da Dan Rabah a tutti. Messaggio: sì, sono solo, ho paura, odio il mondo e me stesso, odio il gioco che mi si impone, odio il nascondere il mio disagio, odio raccontare cose non vere della mia vita, per difendermi da intrusioni o attacchi. Mi sento chiuso in una gabbia, costretto, legato, e non ho la forza di liberarmi, di vivere, di avere una relazione serena con mia moglie. Spero che in questo sito si abbia la dignità di parlarsi, di consigliarsi. Ci sono grandi risposte come l'analisi o le terapie, ma ci sono anche piccoli trucchi di sopravvivenza: alzarsi la mattina, fare 2 passi nel parco. Io ho avuto 2 brevi soggiorni in casa di cura, o forse più semplicemente in manicomio. Non esperienza traumatica, ma vedere gente ridotta così male, ti fa tremare dentro. E la violenza, gli strilli, i pianti e tante sigarette. E io e il mio amico Ugo abbiamo cominciato a correre nel parco e questo ci ha dato autostima, buon umore, la forza di ridere e anche l'amicizia di 2 compagni di strada dalla distrazione così cupa. Potrei scrivere ore e anche questo aiuta e libera, ma non voglio esagerare. Questa vuole essere anche una risposta a Cristiano e Dedi. Buonanotte, Dan. Soggetto: scrivere, riconoscersi. Da Dan a tutti. Messaggio: ho scritto molte titubanze, mi riconosceranno. Faccio parte di questo gruppo, parlo una lingua sconosciuta, ebbene sì. Ho ricevuto ben 2 risposte calorose e simpatiche. Io ho la maniodepressione. brevi momenti di complessi di onnipotenza o complesso del profeta, e anni di autopunizioni, depressioni disperate fino a tendenze suicide. Oibò. Oggi sono in una fase di ricostruzione dopo che il mondo in cui ho vissuto si è disgregato. Mi sento estraneo, diverso. Odio la violenza, anche verbale. La competizione, ovviamente non trovo lavoro né amici. Oibò. Ed ecco che il computer diventa l'unica cosa che parla con me. Quando ero adolescente me ne stavo ore a fantasticare, a disegnare, a scrivere. Poi mi hanno spinto alla socializzazione, politica, arte, amore, e ora la solitudine è un fallimento, un'angoscia. Credo sia giusto usare questo muro anche per urlare, vomitare, descrivere la pulsione di morte. È utile, è una lezione per altri, un allarme. 20 anni fa volevo morire, o meglio, dentro di me una voce mi istigava. Buttati, tagliati, spara, sei un fallito, un peso. Telefonai al mio psicologo. La seduta è mercoledì alle 18, ora non posso. Alla fine presi pastiglie per azzittire la voce, 2 volte. Ancora non so se volevo perdermi o salvarmi, ma mi aspettavo che qualcuno si accorgesse di me, mi guardasse. Sì, voglio parlare, non voglio vergognarmi dei miei disagi. Soggetto, scrivere, riconoscersi, da Olimpia a Dan. Messaggio. Bravo Dan, continua a sfogarti. Vedrai che non ti farà altro che bene. Vergognarsi di cosa? Noi, io, siamo qui ad ascoltarti e se vuoi a darti una mano. Soggetto, scusate il disturbo, da Dan a Dedi. Quanto ho scritto è dedicato soprattutto a te. Anche il parlare di cose remote e dolorose come tentati suicidi e permanenze in manicomio. Posso fare qualcosa di più per un compagno di sventura che spogliarmi e correre nudo nel parco? Che amico cerchi? Di quale solitudine soffri? Sei sicuro che vuoi compagnia? Io posso correre con te alla ricerca di un senso, ma non tirare pugni in faccia a chi si avvicina. La freccia che lanci quasi sempre colpisce al tuo cuore. Rispondi. Soggetto, risposta, un muro dove sbattere la testa, da Lorenzo a Dan. Messaggio. Per fortuna ho trovato questo muro contro il quale sbattere la testa. Ecco, torna la depressione. Odio il mondo, non so cosa fare, dormo. E cerco qualcosa da fare per sentirmi esistere. Non riesco a spiegare. Cerchiamo di resistere finché passa. È tornata anche per me, ma quando passerà? Non fo sosta, non ho momenti vivibili. L'unica mia speranza è che il buon Dio mi faccia passare a miglior vita. È ormai da troppo tempo che invece di vivere sopravvivo. Ciao. Soggetto, replica, stanchezza. Da Dan a Olimpia. Messaggio. Non essere triste, amica lontana. Ti immagino con gli occhi chiusi su una spiaggia vuota. Il mare è quieto, le palme ferme ti sorridono. Tuffati nelle acque fresche. Un delfino ti attende. Soggetto, per Cristiano e altri. Da Dan a tutti. Più a lungo e più a fondo. Prima di tutto mi fa bene leggere che altri vivono cose simili alle mie. Chiusura, solitudine, consapevolezza e paura della propria debolezza. Paura di rivelarsi. Come raccontare il tuo disturbo e la tua pazzia. Un tempo la gente aveva un esaurimento, spariva un po' e poi tornava come nuovo. Andava dallo psicologo e tornava quieto e saggio. Invece nella vita vera tu rimani sempre lo stesso, con un sacco di problemi che ricompaiono con varie varianti, con facce diverse. Oibò. Io vivo così da più di 20 anni, con momenti di gloria, amore, apertura, e poi improvvisamente il cielo ti cade sulla testa. Odio le pillole, ma la psichiatra non me le vuol ridurre. Una volta ho smesso contro il parere medico. Ho avuto 6 mesi di casino. Questo era Dan Rabat. Grazie.